Pleasure to welcome you all to this online event, which is generously hosted by our wonderful partners, Alliance Magazine. And we are broadcasting live actually from our LGT offices here in Zurich. And this is to mark the official launch of our latest publication, the Wealth for Impact, Global Perspectives from the Next Generations of Wealth Holders. My name is Nina Hoas, and I lead the philanthropy offering at LGT, LGT being a private bank, also a family business. In fact, it's entirely owned by the princely family of Liechtenstein. And in the studio, we have, well, we're only 3 at the moment, but we might be 4. But we have my very dear colleague, a long-standing colleague. In fact, we've been working for a long time. In philanthropy advisory, and also my co-author of this report, and this is Silvia, Bastante. And we have a most inspirational, I would say a next gen, so a most inspirational individual that we not only interviewed for this study that we're launching today, but you also very kindly agreed to be featured in the study amongst 20. So we have 20 individuals that have very kindly and personally shared their stories and their perspectives, and we place them throughout this publication. And you are one of them. Rudy Hilti is also one of them, who might be showing up later, but he's got some issues coming to the studio. So I will do a bit of questioning. So we will have some questions. We will also open up for questions from the online audience, so you can share your questions in the chat, and this will be coming to me later. But before that, I wanted to hand over to Silvia, who will be sharing with us the key findings of this report. And we're really seriously launching it today, and you will be receiving actually the report after this, so that you know. And I wanted to share maybe just a little bit how this report was born before I hand over to you, Silvia. And it is because in philanthropy advisory, I mean, we've been working now for quite some time. I think we've been working more than a decade now. And the conversations that we're having with our clients are obviously very much around giving, but they start to become much more than that. And we are witnessing right now and within the next 50 years, actually the biggest transfer of wealth in history. And this is obviously not only a financial event. Actually, this is something that will have far-reaching applications also for our society because of the decisions that these next generations or future generations of wealth holders will be making. And as I think, you know, for me, it was a pivotal time in my career, maybe probably 10 years ago or so. I was interviewing individuals for another publication I was doing on philanthropy in the Nordic countries. And I was interviewing one woman, and we were having a conversation, and I identified her as a philanthropist, but she was actually telling me, well, hey, the impact that I can have, it's actually much more far-reaching when you look at the way that I manage and govern my businesses and my family, the way that I choose to invest, or the way that I choose to raise my family, the way that I are thinking of choices when it comes to spending my money, apart from the giving. So beyond the giving part, she feels that she has a lot more of impact when you're looking into all these different dimensions of wealth. And this is really what was born and drove us to making this report, to look at perspectives that individuals have when it comes to the impact that they can have with their wealth. But anyways, more on that and our key highlights of the study that Silvia, you will be sharing with us now.
Thank you so much, dear Nina. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of us, with all of you today. As a woman that comes from the Global South, specifically from Peru, it is wonderful to be partnering with Alliance Magazine, given that I've been reading this publication for the last 20 years. And as you rightly put it, Nina, the idea for this report, even though we're only publishing it today, has been in the making for at least 3 years. Already some time ago, we were having precisely this type of conversations with people that we were advising primarily on philanthropy in different parts of the world. And as one of the interviewees for the report very nicely put it, I don't want to have different pockets. This is my little pocket for investments. This is my pocket for philanthropy. This is for consumption. And many of them were looking for a more holistic conception of wealth. And many of them were also recognizing that despite the fact that we all very much care about philanthropy is not the only way to have an impact in the world. We can have arguably a larger impact with how wealth is created in the first place, also how wealth is invested, and how wealth is spent. So this is why a couple of years ago, we already came up with the concept of the 5 dimensions of wealth, which for us are about how wealth is created, invested, spent, given, and transferred. So last year, we had over 60 interviews with people from 30 different countries to get their perspectives. And I will tell you a little bit more about the people that we interviewed for this study. But I would also want to mention that we had quite a lot of debate about calling it next generations, because by that we don't mean a specific age group of young people. We just mean people who may have inherited or will inherit from a previous generation of a wealth-owning family. And many also consider themselves wealth creators. So as you can see in the slides that have just been put up, the study is based on 60 interviews. The ages range from 18 to 77. They represent from the 2nd to the 26th generation. And very importantly for us, we got to gender parity because we interviewed 50% women and 50% men. The study also includes case stories from 20 inspiring individuals. You can see some of them on the screen now, and you will receive the report and be able to learn more about their stories. But I must say that also that the study is not necessarily a representative sample of the wealthy individuals from around the world, but rather we chose people that could potentially inspire others and are sharing very personally their perspectives. And we hope that with this study, we also inspire the wider community to have more frank conversations and discussions with their own families. Before we actually go into some of the key findings of the study, I wanted to share 3 key reflections. You will see in the slide the topics that are covered. But the 3 things that I think stood out for us, and would love to hear Anita's views in a little bit as well. The first one is that this study confirmed our original thesis that the next generations of wealth holders take a more holistic view of wealth and understand the importance of sustainability in creating, investing, spending, giving, and transferring wealth. It also confirmed, and this will not come as a surprise to our audience, that families have the biggest influence on the next generations. We kind of knew that this would be the case, but it was very nice to have it confirmed when we actually did the study. The second reflection is about how many next generations of wealth holders were eager to have this conversation with us. In total, we approached around 100 individuals and interviewed more than 60. And in the cases where we didn't interview them, it was usually just because of scheduling. We couldn't find a time that worked. So for us, this highlighted how much people are really looking to have a space where they can actually have these conversations in a setting where they can express their honest views and without fear, especially because the people we interviewed are the ones who are trying to utilize wealth for a positive impact. And some of the interviewees also confided in us that they have almost a certain level of unease about what it means to be wealthy in an increasingly unequal world where we can see so much suffering around us. So we're very grateful to all of our interviewees for sharing so openly. And I would go to the third reflection or thing that stood out for us from the study, which is that truly there is not a single path to have a positive impact. Each person has charted their own unique paths, and this is precisely what we want to do with this study. Is hopefully people can see themselves reflected in the study and also find inspiration from their peers. With that, I will briefly take you through the key findings of the study. There's 20 key findings altogether. There are summarized versions on the screen right now, but you will be able to read all of them once you receive the study later today or tomorrow. The first was in terms of the meaning of wealth. We know that the awareness of privilege emerged amongst our interviewees before reaching adulthood, frequently through interaction with their communities. This is not really surprising because we know that privilege is often invisible to those who have it, and it can only be understood in relationship to others. The other point that stood out for us in terms of the meaning of wealth is that whilst wealth represents for many opportunities and also freedom, most of the people we had conversations with also see it as a responsibility. And for a few, it even represents a burden. And the individual wealth holders who feel most engaged and fulfilled with their own lives are the ones who have defined their own purpose, who have forged their own paths and found their very personal meanings for life that do not mean that they have to conform to the expectations of others. And some families really encourage this, and this is a very good thing to do for sure. In terms of how wealth is created, not surprisingly, wealth is largely created through entrepreneurial ventures and family-owned businesses in diverse industries. And wealth creation is a long-term process. We also know that family ownership provides significantly greater freedom and opportunities to have a stronger focus on sustainability. In terms of how wealth is invested, most interviewees adhere to specific environmental, social, and governance (ESG) guidelines, and many also engage in impact investing. In fact, most that we had conversations with are aiming to increase their allocation to impact investing. However, especially with those that had most experience in this space, it was clear that balancing sustainability with financial returns remains up to a certain point challenging. Though everybody understands that this is very important, it's not necessarily a very easy thing to do. In terms of how wealth is spent, this was very interesting for us that of all the dimensions of wealth, spending appears to be the least aligned with values. And we're hypothesizing that that may be because it's maybe the most private use of wealth. Some families really encourage quite a bit of modesty and frugality, which can also lead to some conflicts, because for some families, certain things are acceptable and others are not, whilst for other family members, certain things are acceptable and others are not. So most of the interviewees that we had actually focused their spending on personal growth and prioritize experiences over material goods. And generally, there was quite a bit of discussion of moving towards what some people call conscious consumption. Moving on, in terms of how wealth is given, and this is my personal passion, the area of philanthropy, giving amongst the next generations varies very widely in terms of both the approach and the amounts. We have heard people giving from less than 1% to some people intend to give 100% of everything they have to support various causes. What is interesting is that the next generations really like to be personally involved, and at the same time, there is growing recognition of the importance of changing systems to address some of the bigger problems that we have in the world. Finally, in terms of how wealth is transferred, many wealth-owning families whose wealth has survived beyond the third generation have developed very effective strategies and structures for governing and transferring wealth, which are typically rooted in shared values. And this, I think, is one of the most important points of the report. And in many of our conversations, people were a lot less concerned about how to transfer the wealth because there's usually mechanisms to do that. What they cared most about is how do we transfer the values to the next generation? How do we make sure that the next generations actually find their own way and their own path in life? And for this, the interviewees highlighted how important it is to actually gradually transfer responsibilities, ensure that there's open communications around the role of wealth, especially that for positive impact. And at the same time, we were surprised at how many families don't actually do this in practice, especially when it comes to conversations about transferring values. Families assume that the values are known by every member of the family, but it is sometimes very helpful to actually have those conversations. And the other element that doesn't get discussed enough is not only how you transfer the wealth, but what does it mean to be wealthy in a world like the one that we live in. And on that note, I will just share one final reflection, and then I'll hand it back for the discussion, which was the cultural elements of wealth, which you can read about in the full report when you receive it. But essentially, there are some settings where speaking about wealth is almost taboo. And it's almost like if you are wealthy, you should not show it at all. And there's other settings where being wealthy is almost admired by the society or by the population. But I think the biggest thing that I personally want with writing this report is that for those that are privileged enough to have wealth, that they find different ways to utilize this wealth as a force for good in our societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvia. Anita, so you are the second generation of a family who's built wealth around media, but also tourism and hotel back in Nigeria. So your father was the founder of The Guardian in Nigeria back in 1980s. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself. How about you introducing yourself a little bit?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I didn't picture that I would ever be somewhere like this, but I think it's very important to show up. First thing I want to say is I asked myself a question: what is this about? Where I'm from? Is it about showing off or showing up? And I'm very much about showing up. So that's why I'm here today. I believe people should learn from some of the experiences we go through. So my name is Anita Ebru. I'm the eldest of 5 children of my parents, and I was born in the UK, and I schooled there from age 8. So my father...
born in Nigeria, no?
No, in the UK,
In the
actually.
UK, yeah.
Yes. So I'm very privileged because out of a pocket full of Nigerians back at that time in the 80s, we actually had the UK as our second home. So we actually had homes there. So we were at boarding school, but we actually had the UK as a base. My dad was very smart investing in properties in the UK, and we've been able to fall back on them. And he rented them out to educate us. So the first thing is education was very important to my father. And that's more or less what he told us, that that's what we were going to get from him, our education. So he gave us a choice. He said to us, you can get educated in England, you can live there if you want, you can live anywhere else, you can come back to Nigeria. There's always a place for you. There are 2 businesses there. I never thought I would move back to Nigeria. I studied politics at Bristol University, and then the whole idea was to become a corporate lawyer. And I did start, but I actually gave up. It wasn't for me, corporate law. Then I decided I want to be a filmmaker. And then I found myself not having my salary anymore. And that's when I first really understood what my dad was really about. He wasn't happy with me. He said, look, you've got your great education. You should carry on with your career. You can't just be arty and want to be making films. What are you going to do? And I was really stuck. I wanted to go to LA and I had all these plans. I had a salary and then I didn't have a salary and I was on my own. So I said to my dad, you know what? I'm going to move back to Nigeria and live with you at home with mom. I wanted to also get to know Nigeria because I actually, if you think about it, I was only spending holidays there. I wasn't actually living there day to day like I was in the UK. I never worked there or anything. So I wanted to get to know my parents better as well, to be fair. And that was the best decision I made. So I moved back and I was posted in the hotel. And I thought, you know, well, I'll probably be fine. I'll earn a decent salary. I'm a graduate after all. And I was offered a great job at a great law firm. But my dad was very strict and he said I had to start at the bottom. So I was in the purchasing department of the hotel. It's called Federal Palace Hotel in Lagos. It was the hotel where Nigeria celebrated Independence Day 1960. So there's actually a legacy story behind that. And, you know, month to month, I just realized the salary wasn't enough because it was in Naira. I mean, I was living at home, so I didn't have any expenses, but it was kind of hard for me. I was very ambitious. And the point I'm trying to make here is I always wanted to be ambitious and have wealth in my own right, which is why I went for a city firm. And all of a sudden I was like, gosh, I can't even do much. So I said, you know what, I'll help you with the hotel, but I need to do my own thing. I was very lucky because I was given an office. And I went to some recruitment agencies to try to get work. And I realized that the setup there at the time, this would have been early 2000s, was not very organized compared to the UK. And so I said to myself, there's a gap here. There aren't that many good recruitment agencies. How do you get jobs? And back then, it was the big management consultancy firms and accountancy firms who, by virtue of having clients, would help their clients recruit. And there was like a couple of small boutique recruitment agencies. But because of my family and my contacts, I realized that if I set one up, that I could actually do quite well here. And I was offered two jobs and something really annoyed me. One of them, the interviewers said to me, oh, we really want you to work here because, you know, of your last name. And I wasn't happy about that nepotism. And I felt it was really unfair to other people who don't have my surname. Like, would they even ever get an interview? Because, you know, unemployment was a big problem right back then, and it still is. So I just felt I had to give something back. So actually, that was my first step in social impact. I'll be very honest with you. I'll be honest that I did intend to make lots of money myself in my own right, but I actually wanted to give back. So what I did is I had no experience in HR or recruitment, but I knew I was good at networking. So I set up this event. It was like, I guess you can call it an exhibition event. I invited 10 companies to come. I said, pay for a stand. I will find you candidates, show up on the day, and I promise you, you'll find some staff. And they were like, whatever. But I was able to push, and I also had some marketing practice. I didn't study marketing, but I sort of made it work. They showed up, and I was very lucky because I used my contacts. So this is where I would define myself as wealthy, because I have these contacts from my father and my mother. The companies came and they found good talent at this event. And then after that, they started calling me. I didn't even have an office or an agency or anything at that time. They started calling me saying, oh, we really love the people we met on the day, we've hired some, we want more. And then that's how that business was born, Minerva Recruitment. Very quickly, I actually made a profit on that day from the stands that was sold, and I was able to set up quickly some staff, and then the business was born. And I mean, in 2 years, it did really, really well. And I was able to like say, I'm done, you know, I'm going to go back to England now. But I didn't. I was meant to only be there for 2 years, and I stayed. So that was ticking along. My agency was called Minerva Recruitment. And then my brother, who was working for my father at The Guardian. So he's the eldest boy. I'm the eldest girl, and I'm actually the eldest. He's the third child. He asked me to help him to set up this new business venture. And I said, what is it? And he said that he wants to get Time Out Nigeria, the license from Time Out International. They're the publishers of Time Out London, which was the first, and they have Time Out New York, It's a listings international lifestyle magazine. And I said, yeah, sure. He said, can you help me to negotiate the contract because of my legal background? And I said, sure, So I was meant to just help to get the deal in place and then leave. But when I went to the meeting in London, I was so interested about the opportunity to put Lagos on the map, Nigeria on the map, among these famous cities in the world that offer listings. So I was really, really interested. I thought, gosh, by virtue of this business, I'll be able to learn about Nigeria, about the hotels, the restaurants, the culture. And then I became an editor because I didn't want to let go and hire people because I was really interested. So then I stayed on in Nigeria and then we published that. That was successful. And the interesting thing here is I always refused to be a publisher or an editor. I didn't want to work for my father. I said, no, I want to have my own identity. But funnily enough, this story has led me to where I am now. And now I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of The Guardian Nigeria. So I resisted for many years, but I realized I have a place and I fit where my father set up a foundation. And I really can't let go now. So I'm there and I'm back to the hotel. I was appointed a director 6 months ago. And again, I resisted after my experience in the early noughties because I just felt this isn't an industry for me. But the two sort of go together because we're trying to put Nigeria on the map. We're trying to promote the stories about Nigeria, the business opportunities about Nigeria, and the tourism in Nigeria. I mean, we've got so much talent on the lifestyle front, our music, our food, our dance, our fashion, our film. And this is like tourism abroad and home, the two things marry. So I realized that, what, I have to stay. And so I'm still in Nigeria. Before that, I was married and I moved to another country. So it is ironic that I'm sitting here now because I didn't think I'd have the time to be working in Nigeria anymore because I got married and I moved to another country for my marriage. But now, I got divorced and I actually have the time and the freedom, which I actually define as part of the wealth, to actually do these things. So that's where I'm at now. And thanks to my father, we were very much brought up to educate our children. So I've been able to put my kids in a very good boarding school to allow me the time. And I do feel that's a privilege that I have, that I'm able to do that, because that was one of the priorities. So it's a shared value that my family have, education. So educating our kids allows us to work and then them to work eventually. So that's a long-winded way of introducing myself. I don't know.
No, that was
I am a journalist. So.
Thank you. But early on you said something about showing up.
Yes.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Given we interviewed more than 60 individuals, 20 of them agreed to actually share their or share publicly, basically, and being featured in the study. Why did you feel that was important?
Well, you're very good at questioning, actually, because I actually wanted to elaborate on that. I will admit I was a very, very private person in the past. I would not be someone that would share experiences. But I did go through some things, and I realized because I've been able to overcome them, because of my position, because of the family name. I mean, my dad, I would say, if you had to define the top thing about his wealth, it would be his name. He had a good name. And I feel that because of that, I'm able to have influence on others. And I think by sharing
good name in
good
terms
name,
of good reputation.
good reputation, standing for the truth. And what comes with the truth? It's been honest, it's been authentic, it's been about sharing that, life is not perfect. So that even if you are from this privileged family or wealthy family, whichever way people define it, you are human and you are able to overcome things. And so I think what I'm trying to say about showing up is 10 years ago, I would never have shown up today. And I felt I have to. That's part of my privilege. That's part of giving back. So I did start a women's sort of movement, I would say, but it was more on a platform. So I used my media experience and my networking experience to host events. And at those events, we discussed topical matters from women's health to abuse to workplace, challenges and conflicts between choice of being mother or a professional, childcare issues, things like that. And I just feel that I've been showing up through that platform, and I've been able to share, because I have had childcare issues because I'm a single mother now. I'd had some women's health issues. I found it very difficult to stay pregnant, but I found an amazing doctor who helped me, and I had successful pregnancies. So I've shared that on my platforms, and also just, there is a lot of abuse going on in the world with women, and it happens to most people, different forms. I don't need to go into details, but again, whether it's from my experience or experiences from friends and things I find out, I'm very much want to create a platform where women have a safe place to address those issues. And then we use the media to try and create awareness so that you never feel alone. So I also want to show up because I don't want people to feel alone, because it can feel alone when people judge you and say you're from this family, so you have no problems, or, I just feel it's very important. I think it can inspire people, and definitely I have been told, when I post certain messages, people sort of recognize that maybe I can identify with those challenges, and they find me a lot more approachable. Like in Nigeria, sometimes they might not want to contact me. They might think, oh, she won't talk to me. But when I come across more human and authentic, they do. And I mean, I'm very accessible to people, and I think I have a sense of duty, because at the end of the day, what did my father want to do? He wanted to give back. He was a philanthropist, and he was religious, and he said that what I have is a blessing from God, and I'm a custodian of this money. It's not my money, it's God's money, and I have to do something with it. So he has done some things with that, and we want to carry on that legacy. So I'm showing up.
Maybe let's stay on the topic of women a little bit, and also on your case, because actually in your case you mentioned a phrase which says, when women are silenced and overlooked, family legacies may be at risk. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, I think what I was trying to say then is that let's say my father was still alive, he probably wouldn't have imagined that I would be so involved, because he just assumed that I'd want to get married and have kids, and then I would maybe move to another country and I'd be focused on that new family. I wouldn't be so focused on, the family I was born into. And so it's interesting, because I feel that my family will be missing out if I wasn't playing the role I play. Like, my brother is, I guess, the heir apparent because he's male. He's a third child, but he relies on me a lot, to give him advice, what decisions to make. So I don't have to be, at the forefront. I don't have to be the CEO. I'm the CSO. So it's almost like we work like a team. I give him advice, but he's the CEO, but he still needs me in the background. He needs my voice. So if I didn't have that position, I mean, I'd be sort of silenced, I guess. And I think, women have that sense of community and trying to keep families together. So I think even in companies, companies try to stay together and not fall apart and have fighting. I think women play a role to kind of keep things together and to sustain things. And I think that's why men and women should work together, because we've all got our strengths, right? Both genders. And I think if you miss out the input of women, you're missing out on making good decisions. And how can you make good decisions if you're silenced? So I think just my own case study, my own family, for sure, I know for a fact my brother relies on me, and people are starting to understand that now. So sometimes he's given a task and then he'll say, oh, ask Anita, and then I'll get the call, and then we'll talk about it and we'll have a meeting together, and I'm just finding that that's happening more and more, because I chose, to take part. And that's because I've decided to speak up and not be scared to sort of say to him, look, I think maybe we should do this, we should make this decision, or we should consider this. I've got things to bring to the table as well, so I think that's what I was trying to say.
So Silvia was mentioning also how values, we see that very much being also a glue and something that is going through generations. And you mentioned a little bit about values as well, but maybe you want to share a little bit more about experiences and values in your family.
Okay, so my father was very much about discipline, education, and he did not want us to ever feel entitled to any inheritance. I mean, he made that very clear. I've given you a lot in my lifetime, And if that's all you get, that's it. You know, you need to go out into the world. And I'm very grateful to my dad, because that's why I was able to have two successful businesses, I said, in my own right. And that's kind of given me the freedom to actually go back and keep an eye on what he started, because I feel that he did start two good things. So those are two values. And also impact, and then standing for the truth. Like I referenced this earlier, by sharing your experiences, that's another way of saying you're telling the truth. You're not behind closed doors and everyone's thinking everything's perfect. You're actually sharing. And you know, that's what we do in our media. We share stories, we share the realities about life, whether it's the economy or politics or society or social impacts, the environment, you know, things like that. So I think those are the main values, and making an impact, standing for the truth, discipline, education, and not feeling entitled. Yeah.
How is that? How do you feel that was prepared going into the next generation and the transfer then from your father to your generation, which is there? Do you feel you were well prepared? Is that something that has been on your mind? Is this something that is a discussion in your family, or?
Oh gosh, we certainly were not prepared. Certain things.
Which actually we sound very often in our report.
Yeah. Oh, we certainly weren't prepared. I mean, what my father intended or foresaw, you know, like maybe in his will, compared to what's happened after, there's certain things he didn't foresee would happen. And we're going to have to tweak some of his intentions to sort of cope with what could potentially come, and maybe things we haven't even seen, you know, like the threats to the families and what could happen if you make, you know, the wrong choices and you go in the wrong direction, or someone's not behaving the way they should, or you can't agree on something. So we're actually in that journey right now, trying to look beyond what my father intended. And we don't necessarily agree with what he intended now because of what we've seen. And that's not to say he didn't get it right, but he just wouldn't have known. And so I think setting up the right structures, you know, working with lawyers, because obviously lawyers can help you to foresee certain things that might happen and how to cope. Hope they don't happen, but it's always good to know what's possible, and so that you're prepared for it, you know, like you would in an agreement, right? In an agreement. So that's very much the journey we're on right now. We are 5 kids, so that is quite a lot. And then by the time we have our children in the mix, I mean, everyone's different. Everyone's got probably different needs, but at the same time, we do try to zone into those values. So yeah.
So we're starting to receive a few questions also from the online audience. So there was a very nice question to you. And this is a little bit, so we can expand on it a little bit. You mentioned that your father was philanthropically involved, and you know, as we notice in our world, working with individuals and families, there are so many different reasons why, and sort of motivations towards philanthropy. And obviously, your father was also grown up in Nigeria, and you have this cultural from Nigeria, right? Maybe speak a little bit about the philanthropy motivations, but then also, and this is the question from the online audience, what are you doing in terms of impact and philanthropy that is maybe a little bit different from your father, if anything?
Gosh, that's a tricky one. In terms of actually giving money, I'm not at that stage, but I have done charity fundraisers. So I've used my media platform to host charity fundraisers and raise money for female charities, because I feel that it's not just about what I can give, but if you can influence others to do the same. And I think you mentioned this earlier, it doesn't matter how much, but if you're getting people engaged. And I would say that what I'm doing differently from my father is using the media platform for philanthropy. So I set up a platform called Guardian Angels. It's a publication, and obviously I'm playing on the brand name The Guardian, and Guardian Angels is obviously a term, and that was very well received. So when I launched my women's platform in 2019, that publication launched on the same day, and people were so excited about it because it was a platform to tell philanthropic stories. It could be a charity, it could be a movement, it could be a social impact initiative. like stories that maybe get lost in the mainstream newspaper. I mean, the newspaper has been covering these stories, but having that title and being in Guardian Angels or being on the cover of it, and that was something I gave back. Obviously, we didn't charge for the space or anything like that. People would just be in it. We would choose who should be featured. That's something I think I've done differently from my dad. And the beauty about that publication is it doesn't have to be just Nigerian content. It can be, universal content that people can relate to from wherever. So that's one of my, it's still developing, to be honest. It hasn't been easy to have a philanthropy publication. So huge respect to Alliance. It's not easy compared to the mainstream one where you just charge for advertising. So, but it's something I'm not going to give up on. So that's one example of what I've done. And you asked what my dad did. So he was very religious. So he donated one of his estates from where he's from in Delta State in Nigeria, which is where the oil region is, to the church. And it's become like a retreat for people to go, and they don't have to pay. They show up and they get hosted this hospitality, and they don't even have to necessarily be Christians, but they can go there to reflect. So almost sort of like a mini pilgrimage, that's sort of a place that accommodates that sort of intention that someone might have. So that's what he did, yeah. And he did one-off acts of philanthropy, like maybe made donations if people asked for, to pay medical bills or education, things like that. I mean, that's what people said. I mean, I didn't know too much before he died, but when he died and his funeral and some tributes were sent, we learned a lot about my father and how generous he was, because he was very strict with us, so we didn't really know. But he did make an impact. And actually, that's actually helped us, because people have said, you know what, if you ever need anything, just call your dad, help me. He opened doors. I mean, these are all examples of using your wealth. You're opening doors, you're getting people a job, or just introducing that person that will change their life. So my dad did a lot of that. Yeah, he did.
Nina, could I jump in with a different question for Anita? I love that throughout everything you do, there's a very strong focus on gender equality, on women's rights. Can you tell us in the 5 dimensions of wealth that we speak about, how wealth is created, how wealth is invested, how wealth is spent, given, and transferred? What are the elements of that you think are most missing when it comes to women's rights?
I think the transfer part, because there is a risk. I mean, let me try and put myself in my father's shoes. He would have said that I'm going to get married, so he'd want to give more to the boys to sustain the name. He wouldn't necessarily want to give as much to the girls, and that's actually what his will said, because he also sees potential spouse as a threat. They might not be like us, so he was that, I think that's the hardest thing, and that's what I'm up against now, to be honest. But then again, because of my experience, I got divorced. So obviously, there could have been that threat of money going to the wrong place, or whatever, however you want to describe it. But I'm also mindful of my brothers. They're not married yet. They could get married, but they might end up in some trouble, and then they get divorced, and then what happens, and how does the wealth transfer? So I feel like it's something we need to think about. It's a tricky, controversial topic, I know, but it's but I think the general rule is that when it comes to the transfer and how to really define that, it's pretty hard. And I think from our culture anyway, it certainly would more be inclined towards the men, because you just assume that things will stay the way, but there are also threats to the men, there are. So I think that's where there's some inequality. Yeah.
This is interesting because we have heard this not exactly in the same way in many of the conversations that we have had. And I don't think it's only a cultural issue, maybe in your country, Nigeria, or in my country, in Peru, in South America. And it's not only a legal issue, it's a broader issue that we face in many of our societies.
I'll take one last question from the audience, and there was a question around your Oh, now let's see here. There's another one there. Where are they? No, sorry. So it's about the philanthropy, and it's around the dynamics also in your family, whether philanthropy and those values transcending obviously from your father and being very philanthropic and having that value of being a service also to the country. Is that something that you feel in the dynamics of your siblings, the 5 siblings? I understand you're very close, right? Is that something that has also played the philanthropy? Is that something that has played also as a
Oh, definitely,
importance?
but in little ways.
Mm.
I wouldn't say in big ways. I wouldn't say they've necessarily signed up to lots of charity, but we take it on a case by case basis. If someone asks, I need help, if we can, we will, and even though they might ask for a loan or something, we might give it, no, we might not get it back, that sort of thing. And I just think, generosity and just being kind to people, and there are different ways. It's not just about handing over money. I wouldn't define philanthropy as simply as that. For sure, it's in our DNA. And my mother especially, I mean, she's phenomenal. I mean, she'll acts of philanthropy. She'll be, in her nice car, and she'll see someone in an accident, and she'll get out of the car and she'll take the person. I mean, there was a man I think his head was cracked open, put him in the car and take him to the hospital, and settle his bill, and just more importantly, make sure he stays alive. I mean, for me, that's an act of philanthropy, not just kindness. Yeah, so it's in our DNA for sure.
Silvia, a question to you maybe, or to us, I guess. Was there any one dimension of wealth? So obviously we've been speaking about the 5 dimensions of wealth, the giving, investing, creation of wealth, as well as transferring and spending. Now, was there any one dimension of wealth that the majority of the interviewees were more hesitating in answering?
Yes, and that was spending.
Yeah, also for me.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned that it's because it's maybe the most private, and because what is acceptable to some people is not acceptable to others, and it's complicated because it's not the amount that you spend. No, it's not that you spend 100 on this and 100 on that. It's the value judgment of our societies about what is acceptable and what is not. And also it's a topic that families just don't have the discussions. I had the case in one of the conversations that 2 siblings received a small advance of inheritance from the previous generation. And one of them utilized it for philanthropy and nonprofits, and the other sibling decided to build themselves a private facility. I won't say the details, right? And the family was not very happy with that. But if nobody was told that this money were given to you exclusively so that you utilize it for philanthropy, for nonprofits, then why is the sibling at fault? Right? And I just think we don't have enough honest discussions about it. And there's also a lot of judgment. For example, there's people that spend their wealth on traveling, on seeing the world, but it depends what you do within your travel. And certain things people find acceptable, and others they say, oh no, that is too much luxury or too high end. And there's no final guidelines for this.
Could I add to that actually?
Yeah,
From my own experience, it's interesting. If we were to be in that position of, when we all got the same amount, I think it's about the why. Why are you spending this money? And I would say we're more or less united, but I think there's maybe one sibling who's a little different. And we would be like, why are you spending it on this and luxury and enjoyment? Why aren't you spending it on education? Or why aren't you saving for your kids' education that your kids you don't even have yet? So I think it would be about the why. Why are you spending that? And I think you're right. We shouldn't judge But I think if we had more conversations, we could understand each other better. And everyone can't be the same. But yeah, I can relate to that point, that could arise in our situation as well, for sure.
It's interesting listening to you. There also,
Yeah.
I recall back to one of the conversations that I had with doing an interview, and I've never really had that before, but what they do as a practice in their family is actually looking at the spending and the giving side. They calculate the amount of spending that they do over the course of the year, and then that is actually the budget for their family's giving the year after. It's quite
Oh,
a unique
wow.
way.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We speak in the report a little bit about what we call compensatory behaviors,
Yeah.
where people feel, well, with the total wealth that I have, I'm not necessarily, everything is not necessarily something that I would be happy talking about. So if I'm doing this on this side, then maybe I can compensate it a little bit. For example, if I'm having a frivolous purchase of a nice handbag or whatever it is that the person wants, then I will also calculate a similar amount and give it to a good cause. So there is a little bit of that going on. Ultimately, what I think is important is that people shouldn't be judged for what they choose to do with their own private wealth. And I find it unfortunate that in some circumstances, people who are choosing to be philanthropic with their wealth, who are choosing to do to help others or to share their wealth, and not only wealth, because philanthropy is not exclusively giving money. It's also volunteering.
Yes.
It's also lending your voice, creating a platform. There's many ways to be philanthropic. But what I think is slightly unfair is that sometimes the people who are being philanthropic are criticized by the way in which they're doing it. And honestly, I think it's better if people behave in this way and share what they have, be it their wealth, but also their own experiences and their networks, and lend their voice to certain causes.
Yes, I would say, back to the question I was asked earlier, that's probably what I do a lot of, giving my time, sharing my network, as I said, sharing how I overcame challenges. And actually, when you talked about the compensatory giving, because I didn't quite understand what it was, but I do now, whenever I go to Nigeria, the exchange rate, what you have in pounds translates to a lot in Naira now. So when I go home, I make a conscious effort not to go out for dinner or anything frivolous like that I might do in England. I stay at home, and then I use the amount of money that I would have probably spent in a week in London, and I, change it to Naira, and I give it to some of the staff, for their education, or to buy a new phone or something like that, because I know that I don't need it when I'm there, and it actually amounts to a lot. I mean, I'm not talking crazy amounts, but yeah, that's what I do. That makes me feel like I'm making a difference, yeah, on when I go back, because I work between the two cities now, London and Lagos. So that's what I do. Yeah.
I think, I mean, just back to the study also on the dimensions. I think one revelation, which I guess we also had a hypothesis on, that people are caring about sustainable and impact investing. But for me, that was very, very apparent actually in the study or in the interviews that we did, that people really are seeking this. They want to do that. They really want to align their values also with their investments. But they feel it's a little bit tough to do that, because there's still this search for the right types of investment when it comes to impact investing and sustainability. There's a lot of untrustfulness in these types of investments as well. But the motivation is definitely there. And I think as a wealth manager, probably this is a great opportunity to find and seek out those, because the motivations is definitely there to align your investments with those values. Maybe we only have a few minutes left, but maybe I'll ask you a last question. And maybe that is around piece of advice. If you would have a piece of advice for others that are trying or wanting to leverage their wealth for good, what would that be?
I think I would advise that it shouldn't be about how to acquire wealth and inherit wealth, but how to create more. I think, yeah, which is just back to that point of sustainability, because if you have that in your family as a value, you're less likely to to fail, because actually in a country like Nigeria, we don't have many generations. I mean, we only celebrated independence in 1960, and there aren't that many case studies of family wealth being sustained into the next, like for example, family businesses, things are not structured greatly, and then they might fall apart, or people might just decide, let's all take our share, and then they spend it. So I think if you in my country anyway, Nigeria, if you're thinking, okay, what wealth am I going to acquire, but you don't have the mindset of how can I also create wealth, then I don't know, then things might not go the way you intend. That would be my advice. Try to find a way to marry the two, creating and acquiring. Yep.
And doing that in a positive way.
In a positive way, yeah.
Silvia, after all the interviews that you've done, that we've done together, and we had quite a few discussions around these findings and interviews that we've had. Maybe do you think you can add on that a piece of advice as well?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a piece of advice, but given that our audience today is in many different parts of the world, many are engaged in the philanthropy sector, or in some other ways in having impact. I was thinking that this study actually has broader applicability, even though it is based on interviews of people that one would consider as wealthy. I think at the end of the day, we all make our living in some way or another. We also spend the income that we have. Hopefully we all give in whatever way, shape, and form we can according to our possibilities. And we're also, if we have children, we're all concerned about how are we raising our children to really live out their own values and their own roles within their society. So I hope that most of our audience will find something of value in the study, and maybe be inspired by learning about the experiences of others that have charted their own paths forward.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. And with that, I also wanted to thank you, well, obviously the audience for listening and participating in questions. I wanted to thank our wonderful partners, Alliance Magazine, and also for sharing the publication that is now officially launched very soon. And I would encourage all of you to share it widely as well. And as a last thank you, I also wanted to thank our other authors of this report. So we have Benjamin Wetterly, who's also heading the family advisory practice at LGT. And we have Julia Kleiser, who's an experienced philanthropy advisor, also sitting in our team at LGT. And we have Antonia Strawrich, yes, exactly. Who wrote a chapter on sustainable and impact investing. And I guess we'll have to re-come again to Alliance Magazine, maybe with having some sharing of Rudy Hilti, who we missed today, unfortunately, but hopefully you will be able to read his personal perspectives as well, together with his wife. They are shared also in this publication that we launched. And with that, I would like to formally close this webinar, and thank you all again for your interest and for listening.